Hey, Dog Nation. Happy weekend to you. I'm Brandon Adams. This is not an official show, but this is the time of year where it seems like there's a lot of news that pops up on a daily basis with player movement, coaching movement, rumors, and everything else. And so I thought it might be appropriate to kind of spend a couple of minutes together kind of talking about everything that has happened today and everything that might happen in the days to come and just kind of catch up on all of that. Of course, there's also some room to celebrate Georgia's win in the Peach Bowl yesterday against Cincinnati, a game that I thought was thrilling and a great win for the Dogs. And so we can talk about that some a little bit too. I'll also say this, we're going to get started here, that it's kind of nice, you're conditioned so much to think about Georgia playing on Saturdays. And when the game is done, the weekend's essentially half over. How nice was it today to wake up and realize you had consumed some Georgia football the day before, but you still had your full weekend in front of you, Saturday and Sunday to come. So all of that just incredibly fun. And we'll talk about all of it here. There's obviously some news that's happened since then, though, that we'll deal with. And that'll probably be the majority of what we discuss here. Many of you saw this on Twitter today initially, and then on our Dog Nation video channels after that. Georgia outside linebacker Azeez Ojulari has announced his intentions to go into the NFL draft. And obviously we celebrate Ojulari, wish him incredibly well as he moves on to the next phase. What an amazing performance from him yesterday in the Peach Bowl. Many people have said the way that Azeez played against the Bearcats possibly propels him to even greater draft potential than he would have had before that. I don't know if that's true or not, but certainly I like the narrative, and certainly I appreciate the performance that Ojulari gave yesterday when probably he didn't have to play, but he chose to play. And not only did he played one of his best games as a Bulldog. That was great to see. As I mentioned a moment ago, something else that was pretty great to see there as well was the interview that he did with our own colleague, Dog Nation's Jeff Sintel today. Dog Nation YouTube page. You can go to Dog Nation on Facebook, kind of check that out. A great retrospective on his time at Georgia, what Azeez expects as he moves on to the NFL. This was terrific stuff. You can see that for yourself in the Dog Nation video channels. I thought Jeff did a good job with that. And I think that Ojulari's performance in the Peach Bowl and his possible draft stock on the rise comes at a good time for Georgia. We've said this before that, with Jermaine Johnson choosing to transfer out of the program, maybe looking for some more playing time somewhere else, Kirby Smart has an opportunity to now maybe point to Ojulari, especially if Ojulari's drafted in the first round, which he very well could be. You can point to Ojulari and say, hey, my system works. Yes, I'm going to ask you to be in an ensemble cast. Yes, I'm going to ask you to share carries with other people, but you can come here. You can be developed by our coaching staff, and you can be at the end of your career exactly where you want to be, which is on your way to the first round of the NFL draft. That's what Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning are about to be able to point to when it comes to Ojulari and say, this was one of our guys. We brought him here. We developed him, and now we've set him loose to go wreak havoc in the NFL as a very well-paid and highly drafted player, about to be a huge success story for Georgia. Now, obviously, if you're a UGA fan, selfishly, you'll clearly miss Ojulari on next year's team. I won't dispute that at all, but this is what you want the program to be, the kind of place where guys can come in and come out on the other side better men, well-paid, great football players. This is an example of that player development thing that all great recruits want to be able to see. Georgia really putting that on display in the case of Ojulari. And obviously, I'll take some more of your comments on that coming up in just a moment. Speaking of recruiting and that aspect of this, one of the big misses for Georgia in its 2020 class was the five-star tight end Arik Gilbert. Now, listen, Georgia didn't strike out when it comes to elite tight ends. Georgia did bring in Darnell Washington from Las Vegas. And yesterday, we saw some of Washington's prodigious talent on display against Cincinnati. But Georgia fans would have liked to have gotten Arik Gilbert too, out of Marietta High School, a real focal point of a very good high school team's offensive attack. And there was a thought that Gilbert was probably a ready day one type player, the kind of guy that you could plug into a program and have him enjoy great success almost immediately at LSU. That turned out to be true. But like maybe seemingly a lot of people at LSU at the moment, Gilbert, I guess, not happy. He had opted out on the end of the season, as was described a few weeks ago. That had already ignited the rumor mill that he might be looking to transfer. And today, as you read on the pages of DogNation.com, Gilbert has made this official. He has put his name into the transfer portal. Now, to be clear, that's all that has happened up to this point in time, that Gilbert is in the transfer portal. We don't know as of yet what his ultimate destination is going to be. And also, it's, I guess, fair to point out, he does have the still right to maybe go back to LSU if he would want to. No one expects him to do that, but the ball is clearly in Gilbert's court. We don't know where he will go, but there is reason to believe that Georgia could be very high on his list for a future destination. And there's no doubt, I think it's very easy to assume that Georgia would certainly welcome with Arik Gilbert with open arms, given how hard they recruited him the first time and how, given just the offensive explosion that's going on in college football, you can never have too many playmakers, and that description fits Gilbert aptly. He is truly a playmaker in every sense of the word, so it's pretty clear that Georgia would want him. I think it's at least plausible that Gilbert might want Georgia. I'm thinking back in time to some of the interviews that Gilbert did with our Jeff Sintel back when he was a recruit on the recruiting trail. And at the time, maybe on Gilbert's part, there was a little bit of skepticism related to related to the nature of the Georgia offense at that time. Would they give the the tight ends the ball? I remember the phrase that he used in particular, the kind of stick route thing where you just sort of run 5 yards and turn around and catch the football. That's not what he wanted. He wanted to run more intricate routes. He wanted to be the primary target on a lot of passing plays. He wanted to potentially be a focal point of an offense. And Georgia's gotten the tight end involved in the last couple of games against the Bearcats yesterday, against Missouri to close out the regular season. And I think that Todd Monken is an upgrade offensively over what James Coley was doing in 2019, which was the offense that Gilbert got to see before he made his college decision. And so if Gilbert found reason not to choose Georgia the first time around, I think there may be less obstacles in Georgia's path in getting Gilbert this second time around. I think that Georgia can position itself and say, we're a better offense than we were a season ago. And we're capable of getting you the football because of JT Daniels' presence at quarterback and Todd Monken's presence at offensive coordinator. Some of the excitement that Gilbert saw when he first chose LSU, the fact that they had Joe Burrow, the fact that they had Joe Brady, all of a sudden now, I'm not saying that Georgia's a replica of all that, because Georgia's still very much a work in progress offensively. Some of what happened yesterday would indicate that to you, but it's at least more exciting, more energized than it would have been the previous year. So yeah, I've been following the Gilbert story closely. Gilbert is one of my favorite players in college football. He's one of my favorite recruits in recent memory. That's a guy that I would love to see be at Georgia. And you better believe that this is a story we're going to be very plugged into over the course of the next few days, couple of weeks, however long it takes for Gilbert to ultimately make his decision. If he chooses Georgia, I think that is both big and good news for UGA. Let me do one more story here, and then we'll kind of get into your comments and kind of spend a few minutes doing that. This one not necessarily directly related to UGA, but it's certainly adjacent to Georgia. You've probably seen the news by now that Alabama offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian is now the head coach at the University of Texas. Texas firing Tom Herman today after at least trying to go through the motions over the course of the last few weeks of making it seem like he was going to return. It wasn't the most glowing endorsement. It was a little bit of a tepid remark or two from Chris Del Conte, the Texas athletic director, about Herman's future, but they at least tried to make it seem like Herman was coming back. Some people have said this was simply an attempt to confuse the fool, maybe even the 2021 signing class for the Longhorns, that they would get a chance to play for the coach they thought they're going to get a chance to play for. But one way or another, the initial vote of confidence for Tom Herman has now fizzled away. Steve Sarkisian is going to be higher. I'll say this quickly about this move. Sarkisian's obviously been through a lot of his personal life. We've been led to believe that's all squared away. And obviously I celebrate that for him and wish him well in this next phase of his life. I don't know, at this point in his coaching career, what kind of recruiter he's going to be or what kind of anything else he's going to be. All I know is he orchestrated one of the most explosive offenses, maybe the most explosive offense I've ever seen in college football. So oftentimes when we see a coach get hired, we're thinking about that for the program management aspects of it, how well he recruits, what kind of assistants he's going to be able to hire. And that's not unimportant when it comes to Sarkisian. But Sarkisian, I believe, is also being brought to Texas to do a job. And that's replicate offensively in Austin what he's done in Tuscaloosa. And given the fact that they changed over year, losing Jerry Jeudy, losing Henry Ruggs, losing Tua Tagovailoa, and really not skipping a beat with what happened there offensively, losing Jalen Waddle during the season and still not skipping a beat, I think the chances of Sarkisian having that success in Austin are probably pretty good. As far as who Alabama could target, I'm sure you'll see lots of lists come out there. Here's what we can say about Saban in recent years, because the previous hires for Saban in this realm, the Doug Nussmeyers, the Jim McElwains folks like that. I think that's all very much in the ancient past. I don't know that there's anything from Saban's history back then that you can really clue in on for what he's going to do right now. I think everything related to Saban and who he may hire as an offensive coordinator is all related to 2014 forward. When Lane Kiffin got that job in 2014, when the Alabama offense truly transitioned and became something much more high-powered, it's that track record that I think that Saban's looking to model this particular OC search on. And it's fair to point out that since Kiffin was coordinator in 2014, there have been 2 other coordinators there. So in this span of time, you're talking about 3 different coordinators. 2 of those were essentially reclamation projects, guys whose reputations as a head coach had been tarnished. They came to Alabama to kind of go through that car wash and come out as maybe a better personal brand on the other side. For Kiffin, I would say that has worked. He's the head coach at Ole Miss again. For Steve Sarkisian, that's clearly worked. He's now the head coach at Texas. But in between that, Brian Dable was the offensive coordinator. Dable, when Saban hired him, was not famous at all. Most people had to look up his Wikipedia page to even know who he was. But he did have great success at Alabama in 2018. He's now the offensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills, and he's one of the really up-and-coming coaches within the NFL ranks. So is this another reclamation type project for Saban? Does he go out and try to get a tarnished image and maybe buy on the cheap? Or does he use whatever scouting eye caused him to identify Dable as a successful coach in the future? It's kind of 2 archetypes for Saban in recent years in terms of the offensive coordinators he's tried to hire. We'll obviously keep our eye on that. And of course, Georgia, it just stands to reason, would love nothing more than to see the Sarkisian departure take Alabama down a peg to make things maybe a little easier for Georgia in the SEC. But listen, Alabama's been through so much, replaced so many coaches and players at this point in time. It certainly stands to reason that they are probably a permanent force in the SEC, at least for now. Okay, with all that said, the Gilbert in the transfer portal, Ojulari is going pro, Sark's going to Texas, leaving Alabama looking for an offensive coordinator. Justin Fields was very impressive last night. Georgia wins its bowl game. For a couple of minutes here on a Saturday evening, we can kind of jump in here and take some comments and give you a chance to kind of weigh in on anything you might want to do. I'll do some YouTube comments. I'll do some Facebook comments. Then I'll let you get back to your weekend, and hopefully you're having a good one here. Oren Chile says Trevor and Fields are both good but different, obviously referencing last night's Sugar Bowl. And I do think the Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields competition is an interesting one. Almost like a Larry Bird, Magic Johnson type thing, to date myself with the reference. 2 guys who are kind of always going to be linked together. They're both parts of the class of 2018. At one point in time, Justin Fields was the nation's #1 recruit, taking that spot from Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence took it back from him before it was all said and done. Trevor Lawrence had the early success as a player in college, winning the national championship in 2018, got the best of Fields a year ago, and yet maybe it was Fields who gets a chance to laugh last, I should say, by really playing one of the most courageous, impressive college football games I've certainly seen in recent memory. What Justin did last night was just amazing. It was fun to watch. I've said before how much I enjoy watching Fields play, and it was just an incredible performance all the way around. And all of a sudden, this kind of back and forth battle rivalry, I think it's a good natured rivalry, but a rivalry nonetheless, between Lawrence and Fields. It is now Fields who's kind of got the upper hand here. And these 2 will, at least if in a figurative sense, battle again come April during the NFL draft, where it's presumed that Lawrence will go ahead of Fields. But after that, it's an NFL career comparison that for these 2 that will go on for years and years and years to come. DMart 42 on the subject of the offensive line from the Peach Bowl yesterday. Yeah, and a day that ultimately I think should be treated as a good thing for the Dogs, the fact that Georgia won the game against a top 10 rated opponent. One of the things that some people were not all that happy about was the performance of the Georgia offensive line. I certainly understand that. Xavier Truss had his problems at left tackle. No one's going to deny that. The challenges of replacing 2 starters in the interior of the offensive line, that seemed to show up a bit too. I would say that last year's makeshift offensive line for the Sugar Bowl may have made that look a lot easier than it actually is. Getting a line ready to go, 5 guys ready to play all that quickly. I just think that Georgia last year made that look a little easier than it probably actually is. The offensive line clearly had some issues for Georgia yesterday. The running game had a hard time getting going, I would say, in part because of that. But the one thing I'm not going to do is now discount any of the players who may have played in that game and say, well, that guy clearly can't be a player at Georgia because of what he did in that game right there. It's fair to say that, certain guys did not have their, best game. That's been pointed out, or did not play as well as people would like them to play. That's certainly fair to point out. But listen, I think everybody who lined up and played for Georgia yesterday, guys who expect to return in 2021, I think they remain prospects. And with more time to prepare, what you hope is a full spring practice, here this year ahead of a normal season of sorts in 2021, we'll get a chance to see a better version of the Georgia offensive line. But one of the reasons why Georgia could have lost and maybe almost did yesterday was obviously related to some issues along the offensive line. Danny Starnes on the subject of Kirby Smart letting Justin Fields leave. And yeah, listen, that's obviously something that I think is pretty prominent in the recent history for Kirby Smart. That's one of the things that nationally he's known for, the fact that he had Fields, and I'll use air quotes around this, let him get away. I'm going to talk about this more on Dog Nation Daily on Monday, but I'm just not quite as stressed out about this topic as I once was. I don't mind the fact that Fields has left Georgia, gone on to great success at Ohio State. I do think it looks like an error not to make Justin Fields your starting quarterback, given how good he's turned out to be. But at the time, was it explainable or at least excusable to make a different decision? Maybe it was. Maybe it was at the time. I think one way or another, look at Nick Saban as a for instance. I mentioned, his history of the quarterbacks. At one point in time, maybe people would have thought that Saban would be defined by the decision to bench Jalen Hurts for Tua Tagovailoa in the national championship game, and that nothing he would ever do from a quarterback situation would ever be more remembered than that. But here we are a couple of years later, and it's actually Mac Jones, who really nobody expected this from, who may be the one of that quarterback group who goes on to win a Heisman Trophy, and he may be the one that leads Alabama to a national championship in a full season as starting quarterback, something that neither Hurts nor Tua Tagovailoa ever did for the Crimson Tide. That, maybe it seems right now that Kirby's always going to be defined by what happened with Justin Fields. I don't believe that's true. I do believe it's true that it looks like a mistake in hindsight. I have no problem telling you that. But this being the thing that always defines Kirby Smart, this decision related to Justin Fields, I don't think that's true. I think this is the kind of thing that Kirby Smart can and will eventually overcome. And years from now, we'll be thinking about whatever it is that JT Daniels finishes his career doing at Georgia, or whatever Brock Vandagriff might do following up on that, or some other quarterback in the future that I've never even heard of at this point. These things have a way of pushing whatever seems prominent now into the distant corner of our memory before it's all said and done. And I'm guessing the situation with Fields will be no different, although clearly it's not a great look for Georgia to see Fields leave UGA and have as much success as he's had at Ohio State, including just a dramatic performance from him last night. Anthony Williams says, do you think that, let me get this from Anthony, who says, do you think that we'll be a greater passing threat next season? I can see JT doing what Mac Jones did this year if given the opportunity to throw more. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that Georgia threw it plenty over the course of the final 4 games of the season, yesterday's Peach Bowl included. I mean, even though Daniels really was not perfect yesterday, misfired on some throws, including one interception, still threw for nearly 400 yards. So I don't think there's any doubt that Georgia has shown, with Daniels at the helmet quarterback, a willingness to throw the football. Now, they still want to run the ball. And when you see the great success that Alabama has had with Najee Harris and other programs have had with their elite running back to go along with their passing game, you understand why teams want to do that. But Georgia has shown with the right quarterback and the right collection of wide receivers that, yeah, they do want to be high powered through the air the same way that every other program does, and at least at the top of the country. And Anthony, to your point about throwing it more in 2021, don't discount this. Ohio State has recruited wide receivers probably as well as any program has recruited any position in recent years. Alabama is also right up there at the top in terms of historic level of talent acquisition at the wide receiver position. I really think we're in an era right now where no one wide receiver, with apologies to Devontae Smith, no one wide receiver is as important as quarterback, but the wide receiver position, the collection of all the guys who play in that position group, I do think they are probably as important as the quarterback position, the guy that, is your starting quarterback. And so for Georgia, if you want to look at reasons for optimism, this passing attack could be better in 2021 than it's been going into a season under Kirby Smart. Don't just look at JT Daniels, although he's clearly an important part of that. Georgia's expected to bring back George Pickens for his junior season, a year older version of Jermaine Burton, a year older and better. We saw Darnell Washington evolve yesterday. Arian Smith as the speedster wide receiver. You hope Dominic Blaylock is coming back from injury. That's a guy who's gained experience. There are a lot of players for Georgia who are both talented and now experienced at the receiver position. This is the best crop of receivers on paper, at least if it works out the way that we assume it will with who's coming back and who's not. This will be the best crop of receivers to start a season that Georgia's certainly had in the Kirby Smart era, and for a number of years before that. That when you think about preseason predictions for Georgia, preseason outlooks for Georgia, I think you'll be thinking about receiver as one of this team's strengths, which is not really, going into a season, something you've said about Georgia and really quite some time. Even though the 2018 team had a bunch of guys that got drafted, I don't think going into the start of the season on paper that group looks better on paper than what this group will look to be in 2021. So chance for a passing game upgrade for a full season next year, yeah, I believe that's a strong possibility. But it's not just the quarterback who makes it so. It's potentially the talent you have at receiver, the full component of experienced talent that you have there that can make that kind of a big deal. Let's get a few more Facebook comments. Danny Starn says, is UGA season over? Yeah, over for now, although in college football, things are never truly over. Georgia will be watching very closely, as we said to start our program, the likelihood that someone like Arik Gilbert might be in play for Georgia in the transfer portal, other rumors that are out there about potentially other transfer type players. So the season may be over, but the Georgia news is far from done. Anthony Williams, I appreciate the kind words. Thanks for that. Let's get a few more Facebook comments. See what folks are saying. Chris Horton says, I feel like so I guess Chris Horton talking about the mobility of JT Daniels. And yeah, I mean, ultimately it's the health status for Daniels that may be the thing that ultimately brings him back to Georgia. I think that Daniels, because of how he throws it, would probably get the attention of a lot of NFL draft scouts. But the one thing that you don't want to do is put on display anything in kind of pre-draft workouts that might look less than 100%. And Daniels, in his own words, I'm going back to like the Marty McGee interview he did a few weeks ago as a for instance on this, in his own words, he said he's almost 100%, but maybe not quite. I think that when he gets poked and prodded by these team physicians and the NFL draft scouts, I think he wants to feel fully confident that he is as healthy as he possibly can be. And obviously you wish that for him as he plays in 2021 if he returns to Georgia. But my guess is that's a huge reason why he might end up coming back, a chance to not only work on his craft. Daniels has not played as much football as some other quarterbacks had. Missed his senior season of high school. That was by choice. Started for USC in 2018. Missed the 2019 season due to injury. And, got to play some here in 2020 after, kind of rehabbing a bit at the front part of the season. This is a guy that has had more time in recent years not playing than playing. So I'm sure he just wants a few in-game reps to kind of polish off his seasoning, but also probably to make sure that he's fully healthy before he moves on to the NFL draft situation as well. My prediction is that Daniels will come back, in other words, and obviously I think Georgia fans kind of hope that's true. Let's get a few more on Facebook. I'll go back over to YouTube for a little bit. I appreciate you guys hopping in here on a Saturday. I thought it was kind of nice to kind of update the news here for a moment. Quentin Truitt says, do you think UJ will experiment with 5 wide receivers now that Arian Smith can blow the top off of defense? We have Blaylock and Rosemy coming back. First of all, I hope to see Marcus Rosemy back on the football field again really soon. His injury did happen in November. His return is going to take a little while there, but I would assume that Blaylock could be fully ready to go by the time next season starts. Yeah, I think that Georgia's going to be looking to go with a lot of multiple receiver sets. But remember, what you saw with the Arik Gilbert, Freudian slip there. What you saw with Darnell Washington on Friday and with John Fitzpatrick, on Friday, and what you saw some of in the Missouri game, I don't think that was just a gimmick to get the attention of Gilbert. I think that Georgia does want to utilize those tight ends, and plus, tight ends are an incredible weapon in the running game as well. That Georgia is looking to spread it out, go wide, use the Arian Smith speed and everything else that you mentioned there. But, Georgia still wants to be able to do to make the comparison once again, what an Alabama can do, what an LSU did a year ago back when it had Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They want to be able to spread you out wide, but then pound you up the middle with the running game. It's one of the reasons why 2019, I think, for a lot of Georgia fans was so frustrating. Without the threat of the receivers spread all over the field that you had to worry about, without the threat of the vertical passing attack, all of a sudden teams just had too easy of a time keying on the Georgia rushing attack. There were too many bodies right there in that tackle box in front of the football for Georgia to really have a successful running game. Well, the inverse of that's obviously true, which is if you've got defenders spread all over the place, all of a sudden that running game can really feast up the middle. And that is what Georgia, I think, is looking to do next season. Use the passing game to set up the run and be unstoppable in both phases. That's at least what you hope to be able to do. And unfortunately, this year, Alabama's giving you a blueprint of exactly what that might look like. Terrence Tarver says you got to get Darnell Washington more involved in the passing game next year. That he's an unbelievably dangerous target. I think that's true. I wouldn't say that somehow Washington was ill used this year, used wrongly, or that he's in any way behind schedule in terms of his development. Gilbert to me was kind of a once in a generation type talent. I believe, with all due respect to Darnell, that Arik Gilbert was more ready to play right away than Darnell probably was. I would attribute that to the fact that Arik was playing in a Marietta program that had an SEC caliber quarterback, had sent a lot of guys into major college football in recent years, and he was just playing a little bit more. This is partly a guess on my part, but I feel like it's an educated guess that Gilbert at Marietta was playing in a more sophisticated system. That helped him be more ready to play. Plus, he had amazing athleticism. Washington had all the potential in the world, but his readiness on day one, I never felt like it was probably where Arik Gilbert's probably was. Now, the end result for both guys after a number of years, they may have equal careers. Washington have a better career. What happens on day one is not necessarily predictive of what's going to be true after 3 years. But I did think that Gilbert was the more ready day one player between the two. And it's a great sign for what 2021 can be for Darnell that he finished the season on such a high note. Being involved in the Missouri game plan to the degree that he was, showing off his athleticism, the highlight play type thing yesterday. I think he's right on schedule to be a big part of this offense in the future. Oren Sheary says BJ needs to talking about BJ Ojulari needs to leave LSU and come back home too. Yeah, I don't get the impression that Ojulari is necessarily thinking about transferring, at least right now. That's my indication on that. But if he did, I'd be right there to welcome him with open arms. I can promise you that. I told this to Terrence Edwards on our Dog Nation postgame show yesterday. I've gotten kind of used to seeing an Ojulari in the Georgia defense. That has become a very comfortable thing for me. So if you could switch out Azeez and bring in BJ for next year, I'd love to do that. But the feeling I get right now is probably not that BJ is looking to move on. Jerry Dogs fan says, where does Bigsby end up? Tank's another one of these guys that I'm going to be watching very closely. We talk about this in Dog Nation Daily. I try to walk a fine line because, we have a big platform. I want to be careful how we use it. I don't want to be irresponsible. There had been some fun social media stuff the other day, but hey, maybe Tank Bigsby's looking to leave. And, while I don't want to be irresponsible putting that kind of stuff out there, I'm like anybody else. I very attracted to the rumor mill. I love that kind of thing from time to time. And there's no denying that Tank Bigsby is right at the center of that rumor mill at the moment, that he could potentially be looking to leave Auburn. We would obviously understand why that is the case. Auburn is completely changing over its coaching staff. Bigsby did have a good relationship, I believe, with Georgia running backs coach Dale McGee. And I think Bigsby wanted to come to Georgia one time before. And, we don't know what the future holds for Georgia, the running back position. It's pretty crowded there right now, but guys could be looking to move on to the NFL. Guys could be, there's a lot of ways in which, there could be some stuff open up there for Georgia. And if it does, I feel very similar to Tank Bigsby the way I feel about Arik Gilbert, that if Georgia could be in a position to pursue Tank Bigsby, I would be very, very excited about all of that. That'd be very fun for me. Very fun for me. DMAR 42, remembering how the Zach Evans stuff, kind of worked out. And that's kind of maybe what kept Georgia at arm's length from Bigsby back a year ago. We kind of all understand that. And I think at the time, the Zach Evans stuff was probably worth it. Evans had the look of a dynamic player. He didn't do a ton this year for TCU, but he did have the look of a dynamic recruit, and, kind of prioritizing him probably made some sense at the time. But listen, Tank Bigsby is also a really good player. And, That's the kind of guy that could potentially really change an offense. And we know, think back some of the stuff that Kendall Milton said. Milton likes Tank. Milton wanted to play, at least mentioned playing with Tank as a possibility of something he might enjoy going back to his time as a recruit. So running backs typically like to be around other great running backs. And so if Georgia could get Tank, the ones that are here, and that, by the way, Tank's not even in the transfer portal, so let's just be really careful how we say all that. But if Bigsby were to put himself out there and Georgia were to be able to get in the mix on that recruitment, my guess is the other running backs who are back here for 2021, my guess is they'd probably welcome him with open arms, because these backs seem to like to share carries with each other, and they kind of validate themselves by how many other good running backs they play with. James Waters says TCU didn't play him a lot, but when they did, he was a beast. Yeah, James, maybe you saw him play more than I did. It seems like he finally eclipsed 100 yards in a game at least once by the end of the season, but I'm happy to hear that he's doing well out there. Brandon Howell says, on the subject of Florida next year in the SEC East, that Florida will probably not be as bad as y'all think based on how cupcake their schedule is. And that's kind of an interesting thing to weigh in. Number one on YouTube, kind of relitigating some of the past with Justin Fields. I mean, I can't do a lot of that at this point in time. It's kind of all been said. I've said before, I would have played Fields more. I would have given him a chance. I probably would have brought him in the second half of the LSU game back in 2018, a day in which the Georgia offense just was not working. And that game may have cost Georgia a spot in the college football playoff in 2018. That people think Georgia didn't make the playoff because they lost to Alabama, but it would been a very different evaluation if Georgia could have somehow figured out a way to beat LSU, which was a winnable game, but just some offensive struggles there that day. I would have given Fields a shot in that game. Now, it's fair to point out that the following game against Florida, Jake Fromm played one of the best games he ever played at Georgia. And at that point in time, he earned the starting job for the rest of the season. We can all go back and do all of this all over again. But I've said before that I would have given him more of a chance in games to show what he was all about, because when you see how good he was right from the jump at Ohio State, obviously Georgia had to know they had a special talent, and it is fair to say that Georgia didn't do enough with it while he was here. We're going to do a couple more minutes, then we're going to go. It's going to get dark on me outside in a minute, so we're going to have to get off the air here in just a second. Oren Chile said that Florida fired 2 secondary coaches today. Was Torian Gray one of the ones that got fired? I didn't see this if it was, because I know he's been rumored to go to South Carolina. That's pretty interesting. And if that be the case, I wonder what that does to the recruitment of Terry and Arnold. That's pretty interesting, Oren. I didn't see that. I'll have to. I thought I'd been fairly plugged in all day long, but I didn't see that. Jerry Dogs fan says that Harrison Bailey's trying to recruit Arik Gilbert to Tennessee. I don't know about the Tennessee situation right now, but I guess anything is possible. Mike Anderson says let's not rehash the Field situation, and I understand where Mike's coming from on that. Joseph Kennedy says Grantham's going to be the next head coach of Tennessee in 2022. I wouldn't mind seeing that. I'm sure many of you saw that Todd Grantham is coming back to Florida next season. Robert Moody, thanks for the kind words. So John Nail says, yeah, Torian Gray is gone. So I guess I did see this, but I didn't really look at all the full nature of the announcement. So I guess when Grantham was announced to come back, they did announce some defensive changes. I haven't really dug too deep into that yet, but kind of interesting to see that one of those assistants that's been rumored to go to South Carolina, I guess, is now free to do so. Yeah, John Nail, thank you for the update on that. I appreciate that. Dan Roller said, how in the world is Todd Grantham keeping his job? That is a great question. That's a great question for sure. Jake Bliven says, I want to see Amir Speed get a chance for some more playing time. Amir's one of those guys. It's really amazing that if you just walked up to him and saw him, like back in the day when you could have a full stadium at Sanford Stadium, let's say you were walking behind the hedges and you were just watching pregame warmups. If you saw Amir Speed, he's a tall defensive back. He looks great in a uniform. If you saw him, you'd think he was like a 3-year starter. He just looks like a football player. So, yeah, I'm hoping that, that Amir is back next year, and I hope he gets a chance for more playing time. I thought it was really fun. And I know there's been a lot said about Latavius Brini, but really fun that we saw two guys of the class of 2017 who haven't gotten as much playing time at Georgia as they would have liked really got a chance yesterday. Speed, who was on the field, Latavius Brini was a big part of everything that kind of went on there. It was really fun to see. And so I hope both those guys are back next season. And I've been a fan of Amir's for a while. In fact, I actually predicted him to have a little bit of a breakout season before the year began. It didn't quite work out the way that I thought that it might, but that's a guy that I certainly haven't given up on him by a long shot. I've said this before, don't assume these guys who haven't got a chance to play very much aren't capable of playing. They're just stuck in kind of a crowded position situation, and Speed may be an example of that. All right. Here we go. Anything else before we go? Yeah, Sonia Prescott weighing in on the Steve Sarkisian situation. We talked about that a little earlier. Derek James says, will the real cousin Eddie, Dan Mullen, keep making excuses in 2021? Yeah, it was certainly not a good look for him after the Cotton Bowl. Pretty ugly all the way around. Jake Blyven said, do you think that Campbell will stay? If I had to guess, I'd probably say no, but I'd certainly like if he did. I think that Campbell's going to probably rate pretty high with NFL draft scouts. My best guess might be that he goes, but maybe not. Maybe not. Joseph Kennedy says Brini's physical, and I would agree with that. Robert Frank, White O'Shields, Adam Anderson bragging on his performance yesterday. Yeah, Anderson, boy, impressive to see him. Great to see. Jerry Dogs fan says, thanks for the updates. Appreciate that. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Appreciate y'all being here today. Thanks for being being a part of this. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay close to Dog Nation. As I said before, you want to read more about Azeez Ojulari. Also, watch the great interview that Jeff did with Azeez on the Dog Nation video channels today. That was certainly great to see. More reaction to whatever happens to the transfer portal. As we said before, it may not just be Arik Gilbert, who's a name worth watching there. There are others, and you know who some of them are. SEC stuff, we're going to be all over that because there's going to be a bunch more coaching movings, assistant coaches, head coaches, everything else. Bowl season is still to come here too. Pretty good looking national championship game in a few days. This is a time of year where, as I said before, the season may end, but the news does not stop. It's going to be fast and furious in the days to come. So stay close to Dog Nation. We'll do our part to update you. I'll pop on video when it seems like it makes sense. And one way or another, I'll also see you Monday morning back at 10 a.m. for Dog Nation Daily. Y'all have a great week.